Well, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the Liberty Center today. We have an exciting speaker for you this afternoon. We have Senator Nathan Dahm here, who's going to be speaking to us today about liberty. You know, liberty is a very, very important part of our humanity. And oftentimes we skim right over the tops of those things. And we let a lot of stuff go that maybe shouldn't be let go. Just an introduction of myself. I'm David McLean. I'm the pastor of Heartland Church, and this is one of our outreach ministries is the Liberty Center. James 1:25 says this, "But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and preserves, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing." That's big. I think our founders understood that, didn't they? I believe our founders absolutely understood what James 1:25 is saying to us. In order for us to keep our liberty, we have to preserve it. And in order for us to walk out our liberty, we have to keep it first. And so a part of what Senator Nathan Dahm's going to be talking about today is how do we do that in a practical way? It's very important that we know these things. Let me read to you a little bit about Nathan Dahm here. Nathan Dahm spent his childhood in Broken Arrow in the great state of Oklahoma. In 1994, the Dahm family had a calling to move to the former communist nation of Romania in Eastern Europe to serve as Christian missionaries. It was through Christ and mission work that Nathan learned the true meaning of service to others and the true destruction of communism. After graduating high school, Nathan served as a missionary for several years before taking on his next call to service. Nathan has seen the effects of communism and socialism and what they can have on a society and a country, which is why the radical left has currently tried to inflict this type of damage on the United States. Nathan is one of the few homeschool graduates to ever serve in the Senate. He has consistently been ranked the most conservative senator in Oklahoma, often being the only senator to score 100% on a conservative rating. Nathan is well known as the Mr. Bill Reader. That's what I know him as, the Mr. Bill Reader, as he has passed over 100 bills. Did you hear that? 100 bills, all focused on protecting the rights of the people, as well as repealing over 200 laws. 200 laws in order to reduce the size and the scope of this state's government. Nathan has seen the effects that communism and socialism can have on a country, and he will not let Oklahoma nor his country succumb to this fate or that fate. While in the state Senate, he has defended the Constitution. He has fought for tax cuts. He has expanded our Second Amendment rights and led the fight to promote conservative values in Oklahoma. As well, he's one of the most pro-life state senators probably in the history of the state of Oklahoma. I'll say that too. I'll add that. Our country right now has serious, serious problems. And it's with the federal government right now. There's also a lot of state government around right now as well. But the overreach of the federal government right now goes far beyond even what Barack Obama did while he was in office. Did you hear that? You know, we lose more rights during war than we do at any other time in this country. Our country has been at war for over 20 years. We just ended it in Afghanistan in a way that our founders would roll over in their graves, even being involved in that foreign entanglement. So, with that said, I couldn't think of a better way to kick off the refire of the Liberty Center with the firebrand of the most liberty-loving state senator in the history of the state of Oklahoma, Nathan Dahm. Come on up here, brother.
Appreciate you, sir. Thank you. Well, I hope I live up to that introduction. Thank you all for coming out here. It's always an honor to be with people, and especially to have the opportunity to speak on liberty. And I'm going to speak on that in the context of the Declaration and the Constitution, two of my favorite documents from the founding era, what created our country. And because we were created as a country focused on liberty. If you read through the Declaration, and I encourage you to do so, it is a very easy document to read, but if you read through the Declaration, you will see that they were fighting for their liberties. And we often have this misconception that they were fighting some foreign government that was trying to infringe upon their liberties, but it was their own government. They were British citizens at this point in time. The Founding Fathers were British, but their own government, their own king, had hired mercenaries to come and fight against them and take away their liberties. Their own king had abolished their state legislatures. Their own king had made it to where judges were solely dependent upon his will, whether or not they would enforce and apply the law equally through liberty. And so they were fighting for their freedoms, for their liberty. Because if you look through and study human history, you will see that the common results of history is that liberty retracts as government grows. Government, unfortunately, is not in the liberty business. It's supposed to be, and I'll show you that from the Declaration, but government generally is not in the liberty business. And most people in government office, whether they are elected officials or bureaucrats or whatever capacity they serve in, they do not have a proper understanding of liberty. So that's one of the main things that we have to understand, is we have to understand liberty so we can properly educate and inform other people, especially those that are in government positions, so that they have a proper understanding of it. And like I said, our country was founded on liberty. The Declaration of Independence, what does it say? It says, we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When we understand that that is not an all-encompassing list, it says among those rights given to us by our Creator are life. Because if you don't have life, well, you can't have your liberty. That's paramount. First and foremost, you must have your life to be able to pursue liberty. But then if you don't have liberty, it is much more difficult and almost impossible to pursue happiness on this earth. If you don't believe me, go to North Korea or any other dictatorial government where they don't have the opportunity to pursue liberty, where their freedoms and rights are restricted and everything is dependent upon the government. They don't even have the opportunity to pursue happiness, let alone the chance to actually catch happiness like we have here in this country. So life must be protected first and foremost. That's why David was saying that I am so pro-life, because I understand that life must be protected. But after life, we have to protect liberty, because that's what our country was founded on. The Declaration is essentially our birthright document. It's the first time they use that terminology, these United States, right? And so it is what created our nation. And it was a nation created on the idea of liberty, and especially on individual rights. And I'm going to hit on that and talk about individual rights, because that is what liberty is about people's individual rights, about your ability to be able to direct your life in a manner that you choose, not government making those decisions for you. And so whenever I have the opportunity to talk about these things, and I'm going to talk both from the Constitution and the Declaration, I'm going to hit on both of those. I mean, the Preamble to the Constitution says the reasons for which they were creating the Constitution, one of which was to secure the blessing of liberty for themselves and their posterity, for future generations. That's one of the reasons that they said that they created the Constitution, was to secure liberty. So liberty has to be secured. It is not just granted to us. Yes, we are endowed by our Creator with certain rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When we are born on this earth, we are given those rights. God Almighty gives us those rights, but government has a history of trying to take them away. So for liberty to be secured, we have to have those in government that understand their proper role. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today, first and foremost, so that we have that understanding of how to protect our liberty and what that means. So whenever I talk about that, I start with the Declaration, because that is our foundational document. And we already started talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If people don't know about anything else in the Declaration, usually they have at least heard of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At very least, people have heard that. Now, some people might not be able to point to the Declaration and say that's where it originated, but we have that foundation in the Declaration. But there's key phrases before and after that we have to absolutely cover. People have to be aware of this. First one, I already mentioned it. It says we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's important that we know that, because that is a unique idea in the history of mankind. Most places, they believe that the government gives you your rights. Therefore, the government can take it away. That's why they also would say that, well, your liberty is dependent upon the government, because you get your rights from government. That is inherently wrong. That's why it was such a amazing foundational document that our founders came up with, declaring that our rights come from our Creator, not from government. They come from our Creator. Then after it talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the very next phrase says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. Jump back over to the Constitution. What does the Preamble say? To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. To secure our rights, the Declaration says, is the purpose for the institution of government. So whenever we talk about why government exists in this country, in the United States, and every level of government, whether it's city council, school board, talk about your county level, state level, federal level, whether it's the Supreme Court, your, some local courts, your municipal court, whatever level of government we are talking about, the purpose of government in this country is supposed to be to secure our rights. That's what the Declaration says, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. But we don't have people in elected office that understand that. They don't understand that their role and their responsibility, their purpose for being in government is supposed to be to secure our rights. They believe that they are in those positions to govern. That's what they will say. I hear them say it all the time at the state capitol building. We were elected to govern. And what they mean by that is we were elected to pass laws so that everybody else has to live life the way that we think is best for them to live their lives, because we know what's best, because we are government officials. We are entitled because we have a title. They won't ever publicly say that, but that's what they think. They believe that they can better determine how you should live your life, how you should spend your money, because they are more than willing to spend your money, not on your behalf, but on behalf of other people through the form of taxes. That's what they truly believe. So most people in elected office do not have an understanding of liberty or how our country was created and founded. But the Declaration is clear. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. And then the very next phrase is also a key, pivotal phrase in the Declaration. It says, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So those that are in elected office, the power they get is because the people have consented to give them that power. So when we form a city government and we create our city councilors or our mayor, it's because the people consent to have that form of government and to say, you are going to be responsible for doing these things on our behalf. Same thing for a state, right? When the state of Oklahoma was created, we created a constitution. The people voted on it and said, okay, we are creating the state of Oklahoma for this purpose to do these things. And we voted on it and we consented for them to do certain things. The problem is most levels of government don't care about the Constitution or their charters or any of those things. They just believe that, again, they are supposed to do whatever they feel like they should do to dictate how you should live your lives. We see it especially at the federal government. That the Constitution is supposed to be a very limiting document, not limiting the liberties of the people, not limiting the rights of the people, but limiting what the government was supposed to do. It is a document to limit them, but we are far out of alignment with the founders' original intent. And I'll show you some of that, but I want it to be clear that the Declaration says that they derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. And it's very important that they put that word just powers in there, through the consent of the governed. Because if government is operating in the area that we have not given them consent, that is not just. It is immoral, it is not justice, and most of what government does is outside of their scope of authority and power, because they are not working to protect our liberties and our rights. I could even give you an example of this. Recently in the state Senate, one of the state senators, actually said in a committee meeting to the effect of, when did this idea of individual rights become so popular? My answer was, well, in 1776, and again in 1787, and for sure in 1789 when we passed something called the Bill of Rights, protecting individual rights. That's when it became so popular. From the foundation of this country, it has been popular to fight for individual rights. Now, yeah, I say it was popular back then. It has lost its popularity because, again, many of them are not fighting for our rights. But we have to understand the foundational principles for our Constitution if we can effectively communicate this to those that are in elected office. And so there's two words that I always like to discuss and point out in both the Declaration and the Constitution, that sometimes we use those words interchangeably. But we have to have a proper understanding of them, because if we don't, we can get them mixed up and use them in an improper fashion. Those words, I've already mentioned them, they're in the Declaration. Those words are rights and powers. Okay? We're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So they mentioned rights, and then they switched over to the word powers. In the Constitution, those words are used as well. But I'll give you the example of sometimes how we misappropriate or misuse one of those terms. How many of you, and I admit I have been guilty of doing this in the past, how many of you have actually ever heard or said, I'm a huge proponent of states' rights? 10th Amendment, right? States' rights. Has anybody ever said that before? You've heard that at least, right? States' rights. The problem with that terminology is states do not have rights. They do not. Governments do not have rights. Only individuals have rights. Only the people have rights. Look at the Constitution. Look at the Bill of Rights, right? The Bill of Rights. What does the First Amendment say? The right of the people to peaceably assemble, right? What does the Second Amendment say? The right of the people to keep and bear arms. Just go down the list. The Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, places, effects. Just go through the entire list. Every time it mentions rights, jump back to the Declaration, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. We, the people, are endowed by our Creator with those rights. But then you go to the 10th Amendment, and what does it say? It says that, I'm sorry, I was about to quote the 9th Amendment, sorry. All powers not delegated to the United States by this Constitution are reserved to the states or to the people. All powers not delegated. So every time they use the word rights, they reference the people. Every time they use the word powers, they talk about the government. Go back to the Declaration, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So there's a difference between the word rights and the word powers. Rights belong to the people. Powers are inherent with the people, but we grant them to the government to operate on our behalf. And the best way I have figured out to explain this is by using a power of attorney example. You can give a power of attorney. You can empower someone else in your family, in your business, a friend, essentially anyone you can empower to do something on your behalf, right? You could have a business partner that you could give power of attorney to make all financial decisions in your business. You could have a spouse that you could give power of attorney to make any decision at all in your life, right? Like your spouse can make any decision. You could have a family member that you can say, you know what, I am going to give power of attorney for this person to make decisions for my child in their education. Whatever, you can assign a very limited power of attorney in scope, or you can do a broad power of attorney, right? Well, the Constitution is a very limited power of attorney. in which the states and the people gave the federal government certain powers to operate on our behalf. That's what the 10th Amendment says. It says all powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states or the people. Because we, the people, through the states, created a federal government and said, we are going to empower you to do certain things. You know what one of those powers is not? Healthcare decisions. We did not give the federal government the power to make healthcare decisions on our behalf. They don't have that power. So if they are operating in that power, if they are using that power, it is unjust. What does the Declaration say? Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We have not consented to give the federal government the authority to make decisions in our healthcare. We haven't consented to give the federal government authority to make decisions in almost any area of our lives. It is supposed to be a very limiting document. And if you go through and you read the Constitution, Article 1 says, all legislative powers herein granted, all legislative powers granted shall be vested in a House and a Senate. What does Article 2 say? The executive power shall be vested in the presidency. Article 3, the judicial power shall be vested in a Supreme Court and such inferior courts as Congress shall from time to time ordain and establish. We gave certain powers to the federal government to operate on our behalf, a very limited power of attorney. They have grown far outside of that, and they are operating outside of their scope of what we haven't empowered them to do. So they're not only violating the Constitution, they are violating justice. Because, again, going back to the Declaration, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We have not consented to this, so they are operating in an unjust manner. And we have to have people that understand the true balance of powers between the federal government, the states, the people, and even within the branches of the federal government. Because that's how we defend our liberties, by having people at every level of elected office, people in the bureaucracies even, people in every level of government that are there to defend our rights, to defend our liberty, not there to tell us how to live our lives. That's just the reality of it. We have a wonderful system in place if we just were to follow it. The problem is we're not following the Constitution. The federal government has grown into this behemoth that is taking over and trying to take over every area of our life to dictate how we live our lives in every minuscule fashion, whether it's what size light bulbs we can have, how much water we can flush through our toilets. I mean, just go into, whether or not we are forced to take a vaccine, whether or not we have the choice of wearing a mask. I mean, just go down the list. And in almost every area of our lives, the federal government is trying to control our lives. They have become anti-liberty. And it's not unique. Like I said, study history, you'll see that every government throughout history has done this in one manner or another, that throughout human history, government tends to grow while liberty tends to shrink. And so we need people that have a true understanding of standing up and fighting for our liberties. Because we have a beautiful founding documents, both the Declaration and the Constitution, set up a government that if we just followed it, liberty would be protected in this country. Because Washington, D.C. would have very limited power. The rest would reside where it's supposed to, with the states and the people. We'd still have to be concerned about the states trampling on our rights. We still have to be concerned about cities trampling on our rights. I mean, just look at the draconian measures that some of these mayors did that thought that they were dictators, that they could do whatever they wanted to. Shutting down businesses, that's not liberty. I mean, just arbitrarily shutting down businesses, making you lose your livelihood, that's not liberty. These people do not have an understanding of liberty. And one of the problems is because their focus is not on future generations. Their focus is not on defending your rights. Their focus is on getting reelected and staying in that position of power. They understand the power side of things wrongly. They look at it as their power to wield, not understanding that they've been given certain power by the people, but they look at it wrongly, but they certainly don't understand rights and they don't understand liberty. So that's what we have to educate them on, is that it is their job that they are elected to stand for liberty. Yes, they're elected to represent a district, whether it's in the House or Senate or City Council ward or whatever the case might be. They are elected to represent their people. But I'll just, and I'll just say this. I've had people that have contacted me before and said, I live in your district, therefore you represent me, you have to do what I say. I will tell them, my answer is yes, within the confines of the Constitution. Because I have people that want me to confiscate other people's firearms. Sorry, the Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. No, I'm not sorry. Okay. I am thrilled that the Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. I'm sorry that they don't understand that and they want me to infringe upon other people's liberties. My job is to defend your liberties. My job is to defend your rights. My job is to stand up for the Constitution, not just to do whatever anyone and everyone says that lives in my district. Because I have 80,000 plus people that live in my Senate district, which means I'm going to have 100,000 different opinions because most of them will have 2 opinions on the same subject, right? So, I mean, it's literally impossible for me to just do what everyone wants. I mean, I could be like some people and stick my finger to the wind and say, okay, you know, what does the majority want in this situation? But that's not how I work, because that's not how our system of government works. We are not majority ruled in this country. We are a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. As Benjamin Franklin said, a democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. A republic is a well-armed land contesting the vote, right? Because we are a constitutional republic that's supposed to be about protecting rights. And so just because the majority wants to take something away from you does not make it right. Just because the majority of people in the United States House and Senate want to take away your rights doesn't make it correct. I mean, and that's a small majority of people, but even if the majority of people in the United States wanted to take away your rights, that doesn't mean they have the authority or the power to do that, because we have rights endowed by our Creator. Just having a majority of the people that want to infringe upon your rights doesn't make it just. We should be about protecting liberty at every level of our lives. And so let me talk on this a little bit, just on the constitutional framework, because that is one of my many pet peeves, is people that say we are a democracy. We are not now, nor have we ever been a democracy. Okay? In fact, when our Constitution was first created, there was only one entity that was directly elected by the people. That is the United States House of Representatives. Every other entity was not directly elected by the people. The people only voted on their congressmen. Now, they got to vote on them every 2 years, and the Founding Fathers wisely did separation of powers even within the House and the Senate, so that all bills dealing with revenue and spending and everything had to originate in the House. So if you didn't like how your congressman was spending money, which most congressmen don't spend it wisely, then you have an opportunity every 2 years to be able to replace your congressman. So they originated all those things in the House of Representatives, where you had the greatest opportunity to affect change if you didn't like how they were spending your money. But the U.S. Senate was not directly elected by the people. That was changed with the 17th Amendment. Those U.S. senators it was not population-based like the House. House, every district has the same or approximately the same number of people. It's population-based. The Senate, we have 2 U.S. senators per state, because the House represents the people, the Senate represents the state. That's why all treaties have to be ratified by the Senate, because there's certain treaties, like the Kyoto Treaty, that impacts oil and gas and energy production, that harms Oklahoma much more than it harms other non-energy producing states. So we have to represent our state. Yes, the people in our state, but our state. That's why the judicial nominations go through the Senate, because the way that they make their opinions, when there's 2 states that are contesting something and suing each other, where does that go? It goes to the Supreme Court. So those states will want to have a better say on who is on the Supreme Court, so that their states, what they're seeking and what they desire would be best represented. So when we first had the Constitution, the senators were not directly elected by the people. They were elected by their state legislators, because the state legislators work in the state, and they would hopefully select and choose a U.S. senator that would represent the state. They weren't directly elected by the people. They were indirectly elected by the people's representatives in the state house and the state senate, but the U.S. Senate was not directly elected by the people. The presidency is still not directly elected by the people. We still have an electoral college. Yes, that has been changed and watered down and everything as well, to where it is somewhat based on the popular vote, but the presidency was not directly elected by the people. It was the electoral college members that chose the president. And then when you get into the Supreme Court, none of them are elected at all, but they are appointed by the presidency and they are confirmed by the Senate. So out of those four entities in the federal government, the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the judiciary, the Supreme Court, only one of them was directly elected by the people, because we are not a democracy. The Founding Fathers studied democracies. They know that democracies fail. Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government, but it's still better than all the others. That was his take on it. But we are not even a democracy. We are a constitutional republic, because we have a constitution that has enshrined protection for our rights and our liberties, if we were to truly follow it. The other issue that we have to learn to address is the courts. This is one of my soapboxes that I could get on for hours. I'm not going to do that to you all. But the courts, Article 3 of the Constitution is the smallest article in the entire Constitution, the creation of the courts. It says that there shall be a Supreme Court and such inferior courts as Congress shall from time to time ordain and establish. Now it talks about other things in there as well, and I'm going to debunk a few things that some misperceptions we have in there that we've been taught and that we've learned over the years. But one of the biggest things we have to realize is that we do not have co-equal branches of government. Have you heard that before, that we have the three co-equal branches of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial? That's not true, okay? We do not have co-equal branches of government. The legislative body, the House and the Senate, were supposed to be the strongest branch in the federal government. The presidency was supposed to be mostly a figurehead, but also the commander-in-chief of the military. So yes, a potentially powerful position during times of war. However, the president can't declare war. Only Congress can declare war. So again, you have these balance of powers, or this conflict within those branches, whereby the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but the president can't declare war, so has to have Congress do that. Well, again, we're not following the Constitution. We haven't been following the Constitution for decades, or over a century in this country in many areas. But we have seen that since we stopped declaring wars, like in World War II, we haven't really won any of the wars that we fought, because we've just fought these conflicts where our troops and our military have their hands tied up and they can't engage under the rules of war. They have to engage under these rules of conflict. And because of that, we are not able to fight the war, win the war, and declare peace, because we haven't declared war. So there is no peace to be declared. But again, we're out of alignment with the Constitution, and it's another affront to our liberties. And as David said, war is one of the biggest ways that they use to infringe upon our liberties. They use that as a reason to take away our liberties time and time again. Now, we haven't declared war, so you could say conflict is one of the main reasons that they use it. But the presidency was supposed to be a fairly weak branch of the federal government. Fairly weak. The legislature was supposed to be the most powerful, but the weakest of all was supposed to be the judiciary. And I'll show this to you. Let me ask you a question. How many justices does it say in the Constitution are supposed to be on the Supreme Court? It doesn't say. It says there shall be a Supreme Court and such inferior courts as the Supreme Court makes? No. It says such inferior courts as Congress shall from time to time ordain and establish. So you could make the argument that constitutionally only the Supreme Court exists. And later on in there it talks about that there shall be a Chief Justice. So you could say that there could be a Supreme Court with one person as the Chief Justice, and that's it. The reason that we have 9 is because Congress put that number in law. It said statutorily there will be 9 members on the Supreme Court. So how do you have co-equal branches of government? That the judiciary and the legislative are co-equals, but the judiciary is appointed by the presidency, confirmed by the Senate. dependent upon the House and the Senate for all their funding. They're not co-equal branches of government. They shouldn't be. Now, we've allowed the Supreme Court and the judiciary to elevate themselves above this. The Constitution even provides jurisdiction for the Supreme Court, that it says that they will have original jurisdiction. And then it says that everything else, people can bring appeals through them, but Congress could at any time limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. I'll give you an example. Roe v. Wade. Everybody's heard of the Roe v. Wade opinion. And let me clarify with this. Everything the Supreme Court does is opinions. It always says it is the opinion of the court. It is not law, as much as they try to make law. They are not the branch that writes law. That is the legislative branch. It is the opinion of the court that. So they can offer their opinions all they want, but they're supposed to offer it in conformity with the Constitution. They just don't do that. But even in Roe v. Wade, one of the things that they said is they said that we don't know when life begins. If this were established by the legislature, it would undo the Roe v. Wade opinion. U.S. Senator Rand Paul has a bill, the Life Begins at Conception Act, that simply states, in the United States, we recognize that life begins at conception. If they were to do that, it would take away the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to be able to rule on any opinions regarding life in an instant. Now, Congress could also just entirely take that away and just pass a law directing the Supreme Court and saying that they have no jurisdiction to be involved in abortion issues. They could take away anything that's not listed in the Constitution as their original jurisdiction. Congress could take that jurisdiction away from the Supreme Court. They've just refused to do it because Congress is violating the Constitution, so they really don't care if the courts violate the Constitution as well. But Congress could limit the jurisdiction of the courts. And it also says, right there in the beginning, such inferior courts as Congress shall from time to time ordain and establish. All these other courts, like the Nutty Ninth that comes up with all these ridiculous opinions all the time, Congress could eliminate them at any time. In fact, there was a member of Congress that proposed that the Nutty Ninth be moved to Guam and that they lose all of their support staff. And so the judges would still continue to be judges, but they would have to fly out to Guam on their own dime to issue their ridiculous opinions without any support staff at all, because Congress has the purse strings. They could do that because they're not supposed to be co-equal branches of government. They absolutely could do that to rein in the courts. But they don't want to because they're violating the Constitution just as much. And so we're seeing that every entity in government has been focusing on actually violating our rights and our liberties when it's beneficial to them. When it increases their power, they have no problem violating our rights. And that's the problem. Again, throughout history, as government grows and as it takes more power, liberty shrinks. So we have to have people that have a true understanding of that. And the courts are one of the biggest ones that have been attacking our liberties. Think of all the different opinions and decisions that all the problems, the things that we're facing in this day and age. Roe v. Wade. Was there a law that was passed on that? Was that just an executive order? No, it was an opinion of the court, a fraudulent opinion of the court. But here we are now, all these decades later, with generations lost through abortion. I mean, if you just go down the list of all the different things that the Supreme Court has done, you'll see that they are the biggest affront to our liberties in the country. Not just them, but the courts in general. Because for some reason, people think that lawyers in a black robe all of a sudden means that they're about defending our liberties. It's not the case. There are good lawyers, there are good judges, but for the most part, they are not about protecting our liberties. One of the other problems, one of the other challenges that we face is we have those at the state level that are not willing to push back against federal encroachments and federal overreach. One of the biggest reasons for that, actually one of the state senators has said it numerous times over the last few weeks, they are concerned about losing federal funds. Now let me explain. There is no such thing as federal funds. It's all taxpayer dollars, okay? Federal funds is just a way for them to be able to sugarcoat it and say, well, you know, we need this federal money coming into our state. Those are taxpayer dollars. It's not, the federal government doesn't have any money that they don't steal from the taxpayers, whether through taxes or through printing it up, which is stealing it from future generations, or from borrowing it from China. So, that is all taxpayer dollars because we are the ones that are put on the hook for that. But we actually have had several state senators over the last few weeks that have been concerned about standing up for liberty because they were concerned about losing federal money, or federal dollars as they call it. That's how the feds have been able to co-opt the state. State legislatures used to have more power. Again, they used to select the U.S. senators. They used to be the ones that actually made most of the laws. The federal government was only supposed to make certain laws that had to be consistent and uniform throughout the country. Everything else was supposed to be handled at the state level. But most people can't even point to and name who their state senator or their state representative is, right? I mean, it's unfortunate because we've lost the focus on the state level, and instead everybody looks to Washington, D.C. as the be-all, end-all. Washington, D.C. is the biggest problem. They are not the solution. If we just followed the Constitution, it would fix a lot of this stuff. But there's so few people that are willing to actually stand up and fight for liberty in those positions. Because, again, I quoted this before, but it was from a pastor who was a poet right after the Civil War. He said the difference between a politician and a statesman is that a politician is looking out for their next election. A statesman is looking out for the next generation. That's what we should be about, protecting liberty, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. I mean, I could throw out the Reagan quote that, liberty is not passed on through the bloodstream. It's never more than one generation away, right? It must be fought for. It must be defended. I mean, the founder said in the preamble, to secure the blessing of liberty. Liberty is not a guarantee. Even though it's endowed to us by our Creator, there is no guarantee of liberty in this world because there are forces that are constantly going to work to take away your liberty. And we cannot just sit idly by and let them do that. We have to stand up for our liberties. We have to push back. We have to defend our liberties. And I'm not saying violently. I'm not advocating for that. I'm saying vocally. It doesn't do any good to be the silent majority. We have to be the vocal majority. We have to talk about liberty, about how good it is. Otherwise, we'll continue to get people elected that will say, what's the big deal about liberty anyways? Well, the big deal about liberty is that we're endowed by our Creator with our liberty. Government is supposed to protect our liberty. You as an elected official, your primary responsibility is to protect my liberties. And if you don't understand that, you should not be in that position. But if they don't ever hear that, if they just hear from the lobbyists, if they just hear from the special interest groups about how to spend the money, that's what their focus is going to be on. So there's a lot of areas where liberty is under attack. There's a lot of areas that we need to address. The judiciary is one of the main ones. Elected officials is one of the main ones. We have to be working to make sure that those people in those positions of power are not abusing their power, that they have an understanding of their responsibility to be in that position of power, and that responsibility is to defend our liberties. That's what we have to do. That's what we have to educate them on. And until we have a critical mass, and by critical mass, it doesn't even have to be the majority. I can tell you, since I've been in the state Senate, yeah, one person can absolutely make a difference. But when you get a second person up there, it's not just a multiplier of, you're not just adding one other person. You're not just reaching those two numbers. Because when one person leads the charge and another person follows behind them, it's a whole lot easier for a third and a fourth and a fifth and even up to a sixth person to come behind them and say, you know what? I see what's happening here. I'm going to stand with you. I just don't want to be the first one leading the charge, right? In fact, my wife and I were just at an event the other day, and just meeting with some people, and he was from out of state, but he asked something about Broken Arrow, and we were talking about Broken Arrow, and then later on, he said, yeah, I was looking you up, Nathan, and I see that you've led the charge on a lot of these liberty issues, and so you've taken a lot of arrows. They fired a lot of arrows at you, and I said, yeah, and I've broken all of them. I said, that must be why I represent Broken Arrow so well, because I don't mind, taking the arrows and breaking them off as they shoot them at me. But I can tell you that when I have stood up, it has emboldened other people to stand up as well. It's not easy to be the one to lead the charge. It's not easy to necessarily be the one to first say something. Everybody likes to be liked. Everybody, doesn't want to offend their family members, their neighbors, people they go to church with and stuff. But if we don't speak up, if we don't be vocal, first of all, we don't know other people that are thinking the same way. And if we do, then it encourages them to speak up and to agree. It's hard to be the first one to say something sometimes. But if you're the one to do that, then other people will quickly follow suit. And we can gain critical mass by actually more and more people having that compound effect. So that's my main thing, is that people have to speak about liberty. We have to be communicating to that. We have to be challenging our elected officials on the principles of liberty. But we also have to be talking to our family and friends about it. I can tell you there are more and more people than ever before that are concerned about their liberties, that are concerned about their loss of liberties, that have been pushed to the limit or over the edge on some of this nonsense that is taking place, whether it was the forced vaccination or the forced mask mandates, or just even some of this other nonsense where they believe that men can be women and vice versa. You know, I mean, that is a liberty issue. Some people will just say that's a culture war issue, but women should have the liberty to be able to compete in women's sports without a man, a biological male, competing against them and potentially stealing a scholarship or a championship or any other number of things. That is a liberty issue. And so, some of these cultural war things, people that are concerned with liberty have not want to engage in those things because they're so focused on the policy or principle side of things that they haven't understood the tactical side of things. And there are those on the left that the left is authoritarianism. They absolutely are. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I know what socialism is. I know what communism is. We as conservatives, we as lovers of liberty, we just want to be left alone, right? I mean, that's a part of liberty. Leave me alone. I'll leave you alone. I don't care if you are a man who thinks he's a woman. If you do that in the privacy of your home, fine. But if you go out and you compete against other women and try and steal their championships and their scholarships, yes, then I care, because you are causing harm to other people. But if you just have your crazy Looney Tunes idea in your head or in the privacy of your home, that's fine, okay? That's one thing. But we as liberty lovers, we want to be left alone. You leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. But here's the problem with that. Those on the left, especially the authoritarian left, socialist, communist, Marxist, and there are plenty of those, and they are real, they will never leave you alone. They want to control every area of your life. They don't just want you to accept them. We heard that for years now, right? We just want acceptance. No, now they want compliance. After they got their compliance, now what do they want? They want celebration. You must celebrate my delusion that I believe that a man can be a woman. And if you don't celebrate it, you're a bigot, and you should lose access to your bank account. You should, lose all these different things. Your liberties should be restricted because you are not complying with their ideology. That's the problem. They want to control every area of our life. And we cannot just leave me alone our way into defending our liberties and maintaining our liberties. We have to stand up. We have to push back. And again, I'm not advocating violence. I am saying that with bullies, sometimes just standing up will cause them to cower down or run away because they're not used to that. They want people to just sit there quietly, silently, being bullied into submission. So again, we have to decide, are we going to be the silent majority? There's more of us than there are of them. Absolutely there are, okay? This is a fringe minority of lunacy. There are more of us than there are of them. Are we going to be a quiet majority and let them continue to gain ground? Or are we going to be vocal and speak on liberty, speak on truth, speak on these things, and in so doing, cause them to scurry back the other direction? Again, go have their delusions in the privacy of their own home, but stop forcing it upon all of us to try to accept it, embrace it, celebrate it. No, we're going to stand for and celebrate liberty. We're going to celebrate our rights. I'll protect their right to free speech. I'm not going to protect they don't have a right, though, to force me to adhere to their ideas. They can say whatever they want, but no, I can say whatever I want as well. So that's what liberty is about. That's what we have to do. So the basic, easiest thing is just to speak up. There's not enough people doing that. I know that we run the risk of being censored or kicked off social media if we do that. But you have relationships with your family and friends and other people that we've always been told, don't talk about politics and religion at Thanksgiving, Christmas, any holidays. You don't talk about those things, right? It's uncouth to talk about those things. Well, the left has never had any problem talking about those things. They talk about it every event they want to. Pro sports, for crying out loud. They bring in politics and religion now, right? Because their politics is their religion. And so, and they've taken over pro sports, and so we cannot just keep ceding ground to them. We have to be vocal. And I'm not saying this is a nonstop 100% of the time, but when the opportunities present yourself, I just ask you to speak up. Speak up for liberty, speak up for rights. Just say, no, that's not what our country was founded on. We were founded on individual rights and individual liberties. The government shouldn't be involved in that. They don't have the power to do that. We have not consented to grant them that power and authority. We are supposed to be a very limited government because we're supposed to be about self-government. So that's where I'm at on liberty. That's my perception. That's why I have been ranked the most conservative senator in state history, because I have fought for our rights and our liberties. That is always my number one priority, is how can I defend the liberties of the people? How can I expand the liberties of the people? That is my focus, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. So, Amanda, did you guys want me to take any questions? Or I know we just have a couple minutes left.
On the issue of liberty, could you emphasize the importance that liberty tied to morality, and how it only works with a moral people? And my second question is, can you explain how important the action people can do in the act of non-compliance?
Yes, and so I promise I didn't plant that question, but I just ended by saying, we're supposed to be limited government because we're supposed to be about self-government. So if the individual is self-governing because they have morality, then you don't need more government interference. If the individual knows that it's wrong to steal, okay, then you don't need laws telling people not to steal. I'm not saying we do away with our laws for stealing, but I am of the perception, I know this is different, people have differing opinions on this, but I do not believe you can legislate morality. I do believe you can legislate behavior, right? People wear their seatbelts because they're either understand that a seatbelt is important and they want to do it, or because they're afraid of getting a ticket, right? I mean, that's basically the two reasons that people choose to wear a seatbelt. It's not because morally they think, well, if I were to get in an accident and not have my seatbelt on, I could go to the hospital, and then other taxpayers might have to pay for my bill if I don't have insurance. Now, I use that as an example because I actually had a law enforcement officer tell me that one time, that's the reason that they do that, is to protect, so that other people don't have to pay the bill for somebody else that is in an accident or something. No, that's not why. It's a revenue stream for cities, okay? They don't do it from a moral basis, but it does impact behavior by saying that you have to wear seatbelts. So I don't believe that legislation, it can create more morality, because I believe morality comes from the heart. I believe people have to have that understanding. Thou shalt not kill, because God's word says you shouldn't kill. If you want to look at it from a liberty perspective, it's because killing would, stealing is taking somebody else's property, killing is taking their life, and if we actually value life, from a moral perspective, we wouldn't do it. So the law is supposed to be about protecting rights or providing some sort of punishment or restitution for those that take somebody else's property or harm their liberties or infringe upon their liberties in some way. But to actually say that it actually changes morality, I don't believe it does. I believe it can change behavior, but I think that people just have to have a change of heart. And I'm not shy about saying that I believe that means a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that He is the way to salvation. And so that is one of the biggest solutions to this, is actually receiving Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And ultimately, that's what true liberty is freedom from sin, from death. That's what true liberty is about. But again, if you have that, then you have morality, and you don't need excessive government trying to interfere with everybody else's lives. There's been times when I've been in the state Senate when I've been the sole no vote. But there's been times where I voted no, and then other people were like, yeah, I should probably vote no on that, and the numbers have increased and stuff. So part of it is voting the right way. People will often say about me that, I can't get anything done at the state capitol. Well, first of all, that's not true. I've passed over 100 laws, but they've all been focused on defending liberty. But along with that, my main focus is not on passing new laws. My main focus is on protecting liberty, and so some of that means stopping bad laws, right? And there's a lot of bad laws, a lot of laws that infringe upon our liberties. So part of it is, yes, stopping the bad stuff from going forward. Some of it is repealing the bad stuff that already exists. the out-of-control spending. I mean, Senator Coburn, when he was up there, he was great at stopping a lot of the spending and holding things up, and one U.S. Senator can make a substantial difference in stopping things. So some people judge their success by how much they pass. I judge my success by how many liberties I protect. Some of that is passing laws. I passed constitutional carry. I passed the first ever in the nation, first ever anti-red flag law. So I have passed things that have expanded liberties, but I've also stopped infringements on liberties too. One quick example, and then I'll do the next question, Amanda. Somebody had a bill one time that would say that if you had bomb-making materials, you were guilty of a felony. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should be out making making bombs, okay, as a part of liberty, but the bill, that was the new law, said that if you had bomb-making materials, you were guilty of a felony. I read the entire bill. The definition, the existing definition of bomb-making materials was any flammable substance and an ignition source. So every person that has their gas can, hairspray, anything like that, and matches, or lighter or anything like that, you could be guilty of a felony. That's an infringement upon your liberty, because you cannot tell me that there wouldn't be overzealous DAs that would try to get you for something else, and they would tack that charge on you, basically terrorism charges of bomb-making materials, to get you to plead down to something else. So I found that when I was reading the bills. I stopped it. I killed that bill. 2 years in a row they tried to get that through. I stopped it. That would be an attack on people's liberties, because it could be very much used and abused by government targeting people. So, I mean, that's just one example of numerous things like that I actually have stopped infringements on liberties.
Yes. I would just like to ask if you were to go to Washington, would you be in favor of the legislature and the Senate living under the same laws that we live under?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's ridiculous that they exempt themselves from so many things. I mean, it's also ridiculous that they engage in insider trading to benefit themselves. But it just goes back to my point that I said early on. They think that they are our betters. They think that they are our rulers, overlords. They feel entitled because they have a title, whether it's senator or representative. It absolutely can be, yes. Now, for that, I feel like one of the best ways to do that would be term limits, because there are pros and cons to term limits. I admit that. You lose the good people as well as the bad. There's a lot more bad people, though, so you get rid of them. So I think term limits would be one of the good ways to get rid of a lot of them, but there's other ways that they could be held accountable. But yeah, I think that any law passed by Congress, it should absolutely apply to them and their staff and everyone else. They shouldn't be exempting themselves like they did with Obamacare or vaccine mandates or anything else that they've done. Yeah.
Yeah, Nathan, how would you, or what would your approach be to ending America's involvement in undeclared wars?
Yeah, so I have worked closely with a couple of groups, one of which I introduced the Defend the Guard Act here in Oklahoma. I've introduced it several years in a row. And what it would say is that that unless there's a declared war, Congress cannot send our National Guard overseas, because they cannot federalize them and send them overseas unless there's a declared war. So that was one way to kind of chip away at it. But yeah, I've been a strong proponent that constitutionally Congress has to declare war. They shouldn't even just be using authorizations for use of force. Now there are other ways. People don't realize this, but like when Al-Qaeda attacked our country, and with terrorism and different things like that, people will ask, well, how do you declare war against an ideology or a fringe group that is not a nation state? You can declare war against another country, but how do you do it? Well, the Constitution allows for letters of marque and reprisal. It's in the Constitution. It's a method. It was used, last time it was used was during World War II. The Goodyear blimp actually was used for reconnaissance. And so it has been used in kind of the more modern era. But basically what that is it's allowing, the government basically allows mercenaries, privateers to go and engage against terrorists or whoever else with a targeted goal operating on behalf of the government. So there are ways you can still do it constitutionally, even with those types of things, but we have to follow the Constitution. There's actually a presumption that anything that the legislature does is presumed constitutional unless the courts throw it out. So there's been times where even in the state level, they've knowingly violated the Constitution, just hoping that nobody would challenge it and it would go to the courts to be potentially challenged that way. I think one of the better ways to do stuff, I've been a big proponent of single subject rule, which we have here at the state level, to where they can't, put a something terrible, if 800 pages of something terrible, and then they start putting on all the amendments, to try to get a vote from somebody else over here, or somebody else, and they put all their pork in it. If we did a single subject rule, that would eliminate a lot of that, and then we would have to have votes on the individual subjects that would stand alone, and then you'd be able to see where people really are, because they'll say stuff like, oh, I voted to allow transgender men in women prisons because it was included in a funding package for the military, and we had to have the funding for the military. So I had to vote on that because it was so much better than just that little bad thing that was included in it. If we eliminated those and just did a single subject rule, I think that would be one of the best ways to target that. Is that all right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Single subject rule, like I mentioned, I've talked with some other members of the House and Senate about that. I would like to see it actually in law, but if it was just passed in the rules, that would be a step forward. But also, I like the Read the Bills Act. What that would say is that for every 100 pages of a bill, it would have to be available for 1 day to be read. So if you have an 800-page bill, it has to be eligible for 8 days for everyone to read. The general public, the senators, the House members, it would have to be available out there. So those are two kind of structural things that I feel like really need to be addressed. I mean, I'm going to continue to work on protecting life. Like Senator Paul has the Life Begins at Conception Act. I already told him I would co-author that. Thomas Massey has a bill to eliminate the Department of Education, which is entirely unconstitutional, so I would co-author that. I mean, there's several things. The Audit the Fed bill, I mean, there's a lot of things like that I would work on, but I've also intend to work on election integrity things, a national voter ID, require that we have a voter ID for every election. Immigration reform is going to be a big topic that I'm going to focus on, but then spending. I mean, we have to cut off the spending. One of the things that I've said is I use Phyllis Schlafly's quote. She says, Democrats are driving us off the fiscal cliff at 75 miles an hour. Republicans are driving us off the cliff at 55 miles an hour. It's not enough just to take back the House and the Senate and slow things down and pump the brakes a little bit. We have to turn around and get going in the opposite direction where we're not spending more than we have. We actually need to be paying down the debt. We need to be balancing the budget and go in the opposite direction. So that's going to be one of my main things is the spending. Thank you all for having us out. Honored to be with you.
Thank you
Amanda.
very much.
Bless you all.
Thank you very much.